Of the ways of knowing in the theory of knowledge, the natural sciences rely most on reason. There are two types of reasoning, inductive and deductive. Inductive reasoning is the process by which specific observations are used to draw general conclusions, specific to general. Deductive reasoning is the process by which a general conclusion is used to predict specific outcomes, general to specific. Both get used in the natural sciences, but we will usually use deductive reasoning. What this means is that we will take a known theory and use it to explain why something happens. This is the case with hydrogen bonding and water. There are three main types of bonds in or between compounds: ionic, covalent, and hydrogen. Ionic bonding involves the transfer and receiving of electrons, creating ions. The opposite charges of the cation and anion attract each other, forming an ionic compound. Covalent bonds, the most common type in organic molecules, involve sharing of electrons. When there is unequal sharing of electron pairs in a molecule, a polar covalent bond is formed, as in the case of water, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and ethanol. In polar molecules, there exist regions that are either more positively or negatively charged. Lastly, there are hydrogen bonds. These are intermolecular forces, rather than chemical bonds, that form between two polar compounds. The positive pole of one molecule forms a hydrogen bond with the negative pole of the other. This is considered to be a weak force and has about 5 to 10% of the strength of a covalent bond. Hydrogen bonds are prevalent in biological molecules and in organisms. They essentially are responsible for the diversity of life which we see in the world today. Look at cellulose. This molecule is a long unbranched chain of beta-glucose found in the cell walls of plants. Hydrogen bonds reinforce the strength of this molecule by forming many hydrogen bonds between parallel strands of cellulose. Look at DNA, where hydrogen bonds hold together the complementary base pairs of A and T and C and G. Look at the three-dimensional structures of proteins, where hydrogen bonding creates alpha helices and beta-pleated sheets. The molecules in each of these three polymers are or may be polar and allow for hydrogen bonds to develop. The structures allow for the bonds to exist and therefore their functions. Hydrogen bonds also explain the unique properties of water molecules too. But how do we know this? The length of a hydrogen bond is between 1 to 2 angstroms, or 0.1 to 0.2 nanometers, too small to be visible to observe, aside from them being invisible to our sensory systems. Even with the most advanced microscopes, it is still not possible to observe this intermolecular force. So how do we know they exist? The first mention of hydrogen bonds was made in 1912 by two researchers, T.S. Moore and T.F. Windmill. Linus Pauling actually referenced their research when he wrote his book, The Nature of the Chemical Bond and the Structure of Molecules and Crystals, an Introduction to Modern Structural Chemistry. Moore and Windmill were researching the state of amines dissolved in aqueous solutions to determine equilibrium constants of pseudoacids and pseudobases. This was 1912. 4 years before Gilbert Lewis introduced Lewis dot diagrams and the valence theory in his 1916 article, The Atom and the Molecule. It was the same article where he formulated the idea of the covalent bond. So, before knowing about electron pairs, Moore and Windmill verified that ammonia and amines partially ionize when dissolved in water due to the formation of hydrogen bonds. But the hydrogen bond was first formally outlined by Wendell Latimer and Worth Rodebush in 1920. They were able to use the valence theory and Lewis dot diagrams to explain how this happens. And then Latimer and Rodebush set off a chain reaction of controversy over the following couple of decades over this theory. Because of Moore and Windmill, and Latimer and Rodebush, and Pauling, we have the theory of hydrogen bonding to explain water. Water is a polar covalent molecule with a slightly positive pole near the hydrogen atoms and slightly negative pole near the oxygen atom. Oxygen has a greater electronegativity than hydrogen, but the difference between is small enough that it is a covalent bond. Because oxygen has a greater electronegativity, the electrons in the compound surround the oxygen more, leaving the positively charged hydrogen nuclei more exposed. And all of this allows for hydrogen bonds to form between different water molecules, simply because it is polar covalent. Due to water's polarity and the formation of hydrogen bonds, water possesses a unique combination of special properties. Cohesion is the property in which water is attracted to itself, and this matters why? It makes water molecules sticky so that it remains a liquid at room temperature rather than a gas. It also creates surface tension, allowing for organisms to walk on water. Adhesion, on the other hand, is where water molecules are attracted to other polar substances. It's why your hair stays wet for a while after washing it. It's also why we measure graduated cylinders from the meniscus because water climbs up the sides of the tube. The combination of cohesion and adhesion are vital for the life forms on Earth. These properties account for how water is able to rise from the ground to the top of a tree. This concept is referred as the Cohesion-Tension Theory, something that will be covered in higher level. Because water is attracted to polar and ionic substances, it makes dihydrogen oxide a wonderful solvent. Solvents are able to dissolve other substances, whereas solutes are the minor component in a solution dissolved in the solvent. This matters to help dissolve minerals or nutrients, making it easier to absorb and transport them. This matters so that substrates have a medium to move to interact with the active sites of its enzyme. Lastly, water has incredible thermal properties. It has a high specific heat capacity. Temperature is how hot something is, whereas heat is how much thermal energy is contained in a substance. Specific heat capacity is the total amount of thermal energy required to raise 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree centigrade. Water has a quite high specific heat capacity. It takes a lot of energy to change its temperature, and it retains the energy for long after the energy source is removed. Heat breaks hydrogen bonds and allows for water to increase in temperature. The hydrogen bonds between water molecules absorb the heat when they break and release heat when they form, which minimizes temperature changes. This makes water a stable environment for aquatic organisms to reside. It also used to be important when people's refrigeration systems ran off of ice. There are some researchers out there, though, that are using this theory of hydrogen bonding for their own pseudoscientific purposes. Some have claimed that water has memory. Water memory claims under certain circumstances, water can retain a memory of solute particles after arbitrarily large dilution. This idea first came to the public stage in 1988 from Jacques Benveniste. The publication of his research in the journal Nature sparked controversy. The research was based on performing serial dilutions of a solution containing antibodies until there was high improbability that antibodies would still be present. When this final solution was exposed to white blood cells, the cells began responding as if they detected the antibodies. His conclusion was that water had the ability to store the properties of the protein and activate a specific response. Why was this controversial? Because one of the most prestigious science journals published research that has yet to be successfully replicated. Because when results cannot be reproduced, the hypothesis is invalid. Yet it still was published after going through the peer review process. The pseudoscientific belief has since gained a following. One person continuing leading this claim is Japanese author, researcher, and entrepreneur Masaru Emoto. Starting in 1994, he's taken photographs of water crystals after they'd been exposed to various stimuli. He uses distilled water only, making it pure water. He then shows letters, words or phrases to the water, or plays music for it, or shows it pictures, or prays to it. Then he allows droplets from that water to freeze, and the pattern in which they freeze is predictable for each stimulus, allegedly. Claims about the memory of water have been categorized as pseudoscientific. What are criteria that can be used to distinguish scientific claims from pseudoscientific claims?